Hello everyone, you're welcome to this very short video on using Excel to plot graphs. This is something you should be doing quite frequently during your course and particularly during this module. Okay, so if you're unfamiliar with Excel, Excel is a spreadsheet program, and what you see on the screen here are rectangular boxes. Each of these boxes is known as a cell, and each cell has an address. The address is shown up here. It is labeled according to the column E and the row 5. Okay, so if I change, it's E5, this becomes D7. This one, I'm taking 2. This one is K7. Okay, so if you're required to plot a graph, the first thing that you do is enter your data. You give the labels at the top, followed by the data points that you recorded. Okay, so what I've shown you here, this data is presented as an example in your lab workbook, and we're just going to work through that example here. One thing to point out with this, the voltage here, I entered the voltage/volts, but only part of that is visible at the minute. If I click into that cell, you'll see the full thing is represented in the formula bar. So the full content of that cell is not visible. To make the full content visible in a column, just go to the column heading, go to the right-hand side of it. You'll see that line with 2 arrows, an arrow on either side appearing. Double click, and it opens out to show the full contents of each cell. Similarly with current, it looks, well, everything is visible there. But just to be absolutely clear, that current stroke milliamps, you'll see it's in cell B1. If I click into cell C1, there is nothing there. So what you see, that slash milliamps, is a spillover from the contents of cell B1. So again, to display the whole contents of the cell in a column, you just click on the column heading, go to the center and double click, and it will open out. Right, so we have our data entered. How do we plot a graph in Excel? Well, the first thing you do is select all the 2 columns of data that you want to plot. Just be aware that at the very beginning, whatever you plot, whatever is in the left-hand column will always appear on the x-axis. Whatever's on the right-hand column will always appear on the y-axis or the vertical axis. So I've selected my 2 sets of data, not included the headings. It doesn't really help to include the headings. Just select the data. Then we go Insert, and I have a selection of charts here available to me. A few include lines. There's one call line here, and a number of, a common mistake to make is to use that as your way of plotting a graph. But if you look at the chart types, there's only one that looks like a graph. There's only one showing axes. And this is the one here. It's scatter XY. Okay. So we're going to insert that. We'll click the down arrow, and these are the options. Now, we want to see the points. You'll see here, some show the points, some join them with dots, and then some just show the line. Again, this one has the dots and each dot joined by a straight line, and this is just the straight line elements. Okay, we are going to add our own straight line to this information. So we just want to show the measurements. Always display your measurements on a graph. Okay, do not opt for one of these ones where you only see the line. You should always show your measurements. Okay, so I click on that, and you see my graph appears. And just to check, the first point on my graph is 6.1, 1.2. So if we go over to the graph, you'll see the 6.1 should be on the horizontal. So go across, it goes to 6, and 1 should be on the vertical. So that represents that point there. And again, if I hover on each point, for example, that point is 23.9 on the x-axis, 17 on the y-axis. So which corresponds to row 8 here. Right. So this isn't, so far, this is not a graph, not a complete graph, because we need to add in a chart title, we need to label the axes, we need to add in a trend line to represent the way the graph is behaving, and we need to display the equation of that straight line. So first of all, to get the chart title, we just click on chart title, and then we type in the title of the chart. Now, this is a graph. This experiment is known as Ohm's law, or the investigation of Ohm's law. So we'll just call it Ohm's law. At this stage, you may not know what Ohm's law is. You will find out more about Ohm's law as you go through your course. Okay, so we've added in the title. To label the axes, and it is important to label the axes with the quantity and the unit involved. There are two ways we can do it. We can use the plus add here to add chart elements, or if we select the graph and up on the title select chart design, you will see add chart element appears here. Both will give you access to the same set of functions. So I'm going to use the plus box here, and these are the chart elements that I can add in. So what I'm first going to do is chart titles, axes titles. I've already done the chart title. So axis titles, and the one that's selected is the vertical one so far. You can see that the box is highlighted here. The horizontal axis title isn't highlighted. So with that highlighted, I want to format that. If we look, more options is here. Okay, so I'm going to, again, make sure the axis is highlighted. Then under the more options, I want to change size and properties here. This is a personal sort of thing, but I prefer to have the axis title horizontal. So it's much more easily read when it's horizontal. So under text direction, I'm just going to make that horizontal. And then I'm going to start typing what I want. So the vertical axis is the right-hand column in the chart. So it's current in milliamps. Hit enter and it will appear on screen. I then click on the horizontal axis title, and again to start typing in that in this one it's voltage in volts. Hit enter and that appears. Now note that everything resizes, so don't manually move things around within this chart. If you start moving things around, it can, depending on what version of Excel you're using, it will stop automatically resizing and basically leaves it up to you then. So it's much easier if you let it resize itself. Okay, so we've got the chart title, we've labeled both axes. The next thing we want to do is work out or add a trend line to this and get the slope of that trend line, or get the equation of that line. So again, go to plus, and trend line is where we need to go. And again, we need to select more options. And even here, we could add a straight line just by clicking on linear here, but there's more to be gained if we go to more options. If we get on the right hand now, you'll see what comes up under more options. There are all these different trend line options: exponential, linear, logarithmic, polynomial, power, and you will use some of these later in the course. But for now, we'll stick with linear. And with linear selected, the advantage of going to more options is that we have the option of displaying equation on chart as well. Okay, so that's that done. And what display equation on chart has given us is we now are given this equation here. You may be familiar with the equation of a straight line being written as y equals mx plus c. And what this tells us is y equals m. M is the slope. So looking at this equation, we can see that the slope of this line is 0.9009, m. That's the number before the x. That is the slope of the graph. Okay, then the plus c. C is the point where the line intercepts the vertical axis. So if we take this line and extend it all the way back, you will see it would hit the y-axis round about here. And what my equation is telling me there is that's going to happen at approximately minus 4.98, well, approximately minus 5. And you can see from the extension there, that would hit at about minus 5. Okay. So, job done. The graph is drawn, everybody's happy. Well, I'm not actually, because when we produce an equation like this, we have done a calculation. And in physics, you really shouldn't carry out a calculation until you're absolutely happy with the units. And there's a problem with this graph. We are not using SI units for each axis. So the unit of voltage is volts, and that's perfectly fine. So this is okay here. But if we look on the vertical axis, the unit used is milliamps. Amps is the SI unit for current. And so we really should be using amps on this axis if we're going to do any calculation. So I'm afraid we're going to have to dump this graph. Okay, so I'm going to click on the graph and hit delete. Okay, and we go back over here. And I just want to show you how simple it is to redraw that graph, but with the correct units. So I'm going to create a third column. Once again, to make sure that the amp is inside the width of the cell, I'm going to double click on the edge of the column. And then what's the relationship between amps and milliamps? Well, milli means thousandths. So when it says 1.2 here, it means 1.2 thousandths of an amp. You take that number and divide it by 1,000 and you get the value in amps. So that's what I'm going to do. And Excel is really, really useful if you want to do repetitive, simple calculations. So I'm going to take the number in B2 and divide it by 1,000. Okay, and that's worked it out. Now the real advantage of this is I can make Excel repeat that calculation if I click on the cell, and you see the equation is written up here. So I click on this cell, I hover over the bottom right-hand corner, and that open cross becomes a solid black cross. And I just click and drag down, and it repeats that calculation for all of the cells. Now I want to plot the voltage in volts against the current in amps. So how do I do that? I'm going to go through that same procedure. You start with selecting the two columns of data. And you'll see that once I click on the voltage and then go to the current, I lose the selection. Okay, so how do I do? Well, another thing, I cannot do this because that's 3 sets of data, and a graph can only, well, it can show 3 sets of data at the same time, but it will not be able to make sense of this. So I select the voltage column, and then what I'm going to do now, I'm going to hit the control key. I've already selected the voltage column. I hit the control key now, and then select the current. Okay, and now we just repeat what I've just shown you already. So insert, we go to charts, and this is the XY scatter we want. We only want the data points. We check that the first point is 6 across, and well, it's no longer 1 up, it's 0.001 up. Okay, and then we start. Chart title is Ohm's Law. Enter. We're going to add in our axis titles. So we will select axis titles, and just to get more options, well, again, I want to make sure we're talking about the vertical axis. Is that one that I want the different options on? Size and properties, text direction, horizontal. And so I put in current in amps. Similarly, for the horizontal axis, it is voltage in volts. Always include the quantity and the unit. And so all that's left to do now is add the trend line. Again, remember, we go to the options, more options, select linear, and then at the bottom, display equation on chart. Okay, and there we have it. We have our graph drawn. We have it correctly labeled. We've correctly titled, and we have our y equals mx plus c. There is still a problem here. This is the last problem you'll be glad to hear. The problem is that y equals mx plus c, we will use this m value. The m value shown here is 0.0009. You might wonder, well, what's the problem with that? We have the value for m, that's good. Well, that is good, but the value for m has only one significant figure. This 0.0009, we don't know what the next decimal place is. We have only one significant figure, and that could be introducing an error of as much as 10% into our final answer, simply by not knowing what the next digit is. So how do we change this? Well, we don't have to replot the graph or anything. We just have to change the way the numbers in this straight line equation are displayed. So right-click inside this box. Obviously, this set of options come up. We've drawn a trend line, and that little box with the equation in it is the trend line label, and we need to format that.